with the Minnesota Transportation Alliance. Some of you may know that I have somewhat of a unique history with the Alliance. I think I hold the record for having the shortest tenure as your president. I think it was 3 months. I was elected in September and then had to resign in December, and I won't go into all of the sordid reasons why, but it was a great time, and it's great to be back with you. I appreciate, as someone who spends a lot of time in the transportation systems in Minnesota, appreciate what you do and the incredible difference you make in terms of helping the public understand the issues related to transportation and exploring solutions for the future as we address the needs of that system going forward. Delighted to be a part of this panel. These people bring tremendous experience and insight into the transportation systems, into the various funding options, and into what's possible to do as we move forward. And I'm happy to have them here today and discussing the transportation issues and transportation funding issues. When I was first elected to the Blaine City Council back in 1904 or 5, 1904 or 5. One of the earliest meetings, and I'm sorry he's not here, Dan Earhart, who was county commissioner in Anoka County, and I met with Bob Hoffman at the DOT building down in St. Paul. And Bob was working on, had been appointed by Governor Perpich to work on a transportation funding alternative committee. And since that time, that was back in, I think in 84 or something like that. Since that time, I think there have probably been about a half a dozen additional transportation funding commissions that have been established and come up with a list of recommendations. And now this time, the TFAF proposal. And in each of those situations, we have discussed at great length the issues, the needs, and even a number of the options. But rarely in all of that time has it resulted in significant action toward meeting those needs or addressing those options. And I'm hoping that that changes now as we move forward, that with the TFAF report, with the studies that are being done, we're going to make real progress in providing for a significant change in the way we fund and how we fund the future of our transportation systems in Minnesota. It proved once again, if we needed more proof as Minnesotans, that we are really good at talking about the issues and not always as good at resolving them. One thing though, or a couple of things that have come out of all of those studies over all of the years, and it's going to provide kind of the groundwork for today's discussion, is that there are some commonalities that I think we need to have as a starting point, as a base point, in all of those different reports. One, I think that we just need to agree to, as got to be a part of the discussion, is that it's got to be statewide. The old arguments about whether it's Metro or whether it's Greater Minnesota, that has no place in the transportation system discussion that depends on interconnectedness, where the economy of the state, the vitality of all of the state is dependent on how connected we are. So one, it's got to be statewide. Two, it's got to be multimodal. And I don't want to get into a discussion about which transit alternatives you like or don't like. That's a different discussion. But it's got to be multimodal in that we've got to understand how all of the different systems connect together, whether it's highways or rail, and we've all seen the reports about the congestion in our rail systems, or our pipelines or our ports and the significance of our ports, whether they're the river ports or the Lake Superior ports, to our system. And all of that has to be addressed in making sure that all of those components are working to provide for an effective and vibrant economic future for our state. And then third, it's got to be sustainable. These one-time insertions of money, while they do a lot of good, are not what makes it possible for us to build the kind of structure for transportation development that we need. you can't expect contractors, if they only know 1 year to year about what the transportation funding is going to be, to go out and buy all kinds of very expensive equipment or take the risk of hiring additional employees. So it's got to be sustainable. And then I would add, although it's never been part of it, it's got to be adequate. Doing small things in the face of great need is not a sufficient response. So with that as kind of a background, we'll turn it over to our panel to give you some of their ideas about transportation options, funding options going forward. The first person to present is going to be Senator Scott Dibble. I'm sure many of you know Senator Dibble. He was born in New York, which I didn't know. That explains a lot.
I lived there for a year.
For years. Also traveled a lot as a young person. One of his parents was in the United States Air Force. So before he was 13, he lived in Bermuda, Italy, Portugal, Alabama, and Texas. And so it gives you an understanding why transportation is an issue for the senator. Senator Dibble was also the first openly homosexual man to run for and be elected to the Minnesota legislature and led the effort for marriage equality here in Minnesota. And I'm delighted to work with him over the years as now the chair of the Senate Transportation Committee, and look forward to his comments on how we can address the transportation funding needs going forward. Yeah, you can stay right there.
Well, thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me? Is this on?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, here we go. There we go. All right. Thanks a lot, and thanks for the introduction and your opening comments, El. And I think all I have to say is what he said. He said I have 5 minutes, and I was saying earlier, I don't know if I have 5 minutes worth of things to say, but then I remembered I'm a senator, and usually I remember to stop talking after about 20 minutes. So I will try to be blessedly brief, because I think I've been in this room before, and I've spoken with many of you personally, and of course, over the last couple of years, we've been running bills to really set the stage and lay the foundation. They weren't symbolic attempts at passing legislation. We were trying to pass those bills, and we actually got a pretty good bill passed off the Senate floor at one point in the last cycle. I would just encourage everyone to take a look at the TFAC report, take a look at the bills that we've proposed over the past couple of years. The short version is, of course, that we passed a pretty good bill in 2008. It was about a third of the loaf or so, and those resources have pretty much been used up and absorbed. Either we spent those dollars, or we've programmed them all through bonding, or the resources that we raised through the gas tax have been absorbed by inflation. All the pressures that cause the declining effort of the traditional gas tax, inflation, fuel efficiency, lower vehicle miles traveled per capita, those sorts of things. And of course, we know that we raised a quarter cent in the metro area for transit. That puts a little bit over now $100 million on the table, and started the beginnings of a transit system. But we know what we have to do to really build for the 1 million people or so that are coming to the metro area in the coming couple of decades. And we certainly aren't going to be able to accommodate all of those folks by laying down more asphalt. We really need more efficient ways of moving people around, and more efficient ways of organizing our land use, and that's available through transit. We also, of course, have to deliver the quality of life that the emerging workforce is looking for, that businesses are looking for, that emerging corporations are looking for, and the like. And so, in terms of the sources, none of this is really complicated. None of it's brain surgery. It's pretty straightforward. Gas tax, as we know, is not indexed in Minnesota. So once you do raise the gas tax, it loses ground pretty quickly. The latest and greatest big idea is somehow or another to key it off of the price of gasoline, perhaps collected at the wholesale level. That seems like a pretty good idea to me. We ran that proposal and really had a really good conversation and surfaced a lot of concerns and issues around that, and have addressed a lot of those. And then, I don't think we're going to get to any magical sorts of ways of raising money like distance and weight fees for a while. That takes a lot of work and a lot of study and a lot of public acceptance and a lot of, so we're waiting for Oregon and other states to run their pilots and really show us the way on some of those ideas. That probably is the way of the future in terms of funding for roads and bridges and the like. Transit, pretty straightforward, looking to fares, looking to sales tax in the metro area. And then we really need to have a better conversation about how we're partnering with local units of government, counties and municipalities and townships. So much of our transportation system, I forget what the percentage is, but the bulk of our transportation system really is owned and operated by those local units. The benefit of flying around the state, driving around the state, meeting with county commissioners and taking a look at state aid highways around the state, and they're in tough shape. They're either falling apart or they just don't have the kind of safety features, or they're just not sufficiently robust to take the commodities to get them up to the interstate system, out to the larger markets, or get them over to the rail system and that sort of thing. And we've done a little bit for counties. We've done nothing for municipalities. Townships own and operate a great deal of our roadway system as well. So looking at some of those, both what goes into the trunk highway fund that comes out, the highway user tax distribution fund that comes out in CASA and MSA and for townships, but also what we're doing to allow and support locals to do some of the effort themselves. We did the half cent, we did the wheelage tax, but that just hasn't been a sufficient set of tools. So that's kind of the waterfront. Those are kind of some of the things we're looking at. I think efficiency is going to have to be a very, very important part of this conversation. At one point, I think MnDOT was forecasting $50 billion just for roadway capacity improvements and some safety improvements. Of course, that was such a big dollar amount that and it also bought something that we didn't really want to own, which is a huge roadway infrastructure that we have to keep up with for a long, long time. So efficiency comes in a lot of forms. Efficiency is, of course, how you deliver the program and how you build those roads and materials and all of those sorts of kind of straightforward efficiencies. But efficiencies is also about making the right kinds of transportation decisions, picking the most efficient modes, making sure that you're really working closely with folks on the ground who have aspiration and vision for their community and understanding what forms of transportation support that aspiration, support our economic goals, build communities that work for all people, understanding how an economy works, not just in terms of delivering people to their jobs and goods to market, but making sure people in all walks of life are a vibrant part, can continue to be a vibrant part of our community. So this bill was always going to have to be bipartisan, now more so. So this is my new best friend, and we're going to have an interesting year. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. The next panelist is Senator John Pederson. The senator was born in Minnesota on a farm, represents Benton, Sherburne, and Stearns County in the Senate. And I didn't realize how big, although I grew up in Mille Lacs County, not too far away, how big a part agriculture remains in those counties, how important that is, not just in the western portion of Stearns County, where you would expect it, but throughout Benton and throughout Sherburne as well, and still a vital part, along with the growing areas that are there. As I said, Senator Pederson represents Benton, Sherburne, and Stearns County. Counties in the Senate, is the ranking member of the Transportation Committee in the Senate. He is also the Vice President and part owner of Amcon Block and Precast Incorporated, and so brings a background and experience in construction and construction issues, but also the movement of materials and how important that is to business vitality in the state. And so, Senator Pederson, we're delighted to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank you for the time that you're investing, and your organizations and the folks that have sent you here, the time that they're investing in this meeting as well, and the work that you do every day and every week and every session as we come together in the legislature. As you heard, I manufacture concrete blocks. I'll be the first to say, as I heard the description here, I'm no expert, and I want you to know that. I'm certainly not any expert in transportation, but what I do know how to make concrete block, and We operate 2 concrete block plants and 2 gravel pits, and every day I got about 25 highway heavy vehicles that pull out onto Highway 10 and head down to Clear Lake and Clearwater and scoot over to 94 and come down into the metro. In fact, in 2014, just about 9 out of every 10 of our vehicles on a daily basis came west or east and south rather than north and west. And so, you know, as Senator Dibble alluded to, I think the new revenue issue is going to be very, very difficult as we move forward. And I'm glad to hear I'm his new best friend. I was trying very hard to be his best friend the last session. But he, I always kept getting pushed farther and farther back. But I think he's accurately described the situation we're going to be in. And as the minority lead, all that means is that I hope to be the chairman of this committee in a couple years, is what that means. So, and certainly you can count on me working towards that, and he's going to be working to hang on to it, obviously. But I hope you understand and can see that I think Senator Dibble and I get along very well, sometimes better than some members and my own caucus to a certain extent when we're talking about transportation issues. But that's one of the things you'll see, I think, members of both parties working to come around this issue very early in the session. I think everybody's gotten the message loud and clear that it's important. You know, the challenge, of course, in the House is going to be the members that were just elected. You know, I represent my community, and I'll never say that I'll never support the new revenue as we move forward. And one of the main reasons is, you know, I have Highway 10 and I-94 runs straight through the heart of my district. I get the number 1 and 2 busiest, most freight corridors that cut my district in half as they come up through St. Cloud, one on the east side and one on the west side. And so moving forward, what are the solutions? I do think existing revenue has got to be one of the solutions. Again, which is going to be very difficult, but I think there's some things right now that come into the general fund that businesses will respond to, in my view. You know, one idea that I've talked to others about is the statewide business property tax, for example, raises hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It's a tax that very few states have, and quite frankly, I do know as recently as last year, the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce is not interested in designating those dollars to anything, because I think they just like to see that tax go away. What it is, it's a tax on commercial and industrial property only in Minnesota, and that goes up, you know, in the neighborhood of 4 to 6% every year is what that goes up. And I think, in my view, I think, you know, part of the reason why we're going to have challenges moving forward is that I would say many of the employers in this state, I'm one of them, I have 112 employees myself, is that they really feel like they've been piled on, quite frankly. And the expenses that we're dealing with on a daily basis, we're just not able to pay for exponentially with our increases in the price of our products. And that's going to be a serious issue moving forward as we seek to find ways to pay for this. But it seems reasonable to me, and when you look at the statewide business property tax, that it's a tax that's already being collected. And if we were to make a push to designate that, for example, to roads and bridges, boy, I think that'd be very difficult for many businesses and employers in this state to not want to support as we move forward. I was glad to hear Senator Dibble talk about efficiencies moving forward. Again, every organization, including the Department of Transportation, is going to have huge staffing problems as we move forward in the next 10 to 15 years. And I'm a person, an elected official, that believes, I'll tell you, there's never been a greater opportunity to redesign how government delivers services to our state than there is right now. And not one person has to lose their job, not one, because they're going to be retiring. You know, I'd like to see MnDOT myself become more of a construction management agency rather than a design build agency. And I realize that's fairly controversial, but I think a lot of the designing that's going on right now could easily move to the private sector. There's engineering firms that can take that over without any difficulty at all. and move our state agency into more of a construction management mode, in my view, is one way to bring some of that efficiency back. And again, like you said, not one engineer has to lose their job until they want to quit working, so to speak. And then one of those other fixes that I think, again, I'm a person that likes to see bonding. I think bonding for roads is a very wise way to finance roads, particularly now with the interest rates. And personally, again, this is nothing that I think there's any kind of broad-based agreement for, but I think it'd certainly be appropriate to even move into a bonding bill, for example, this coming session, that would focus strictly on transportation and let the conventional bonding bill stand alone, as it always does in the second year of the biennium. But let's maybe work towards a bonding bill for transportation specifically. Every single job in that bill would be transportation related in the first year of that biennium, is something, again, that I think many elected officials could come around and support as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Our next panelist is Erik Davis. For those of you who don't know, Erik serves as the Chief of Staff at the Minnesota Department of Transportation. A critical role for the Commissioner, I can tell you. And in this role, he assists the Commissioner in managing high-profile agency initiatives, performing special projects, and providing liaison with agency personnel at the Governor's Office, transportation partners, the media, and representatives of public and private sector organizations. Erik has been with MnDOT for 10 years, serving most recently as the agency's Chief Risk Officer. He has worked in human resources for most of his career, including serving as HR Director for both MnDOT and the Stillwater School District. Erik is a Lieutenant Colonel in the U.S. Air Force, so don't mess with him. That's all I want to say. Erik, thank you for being here. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Al. I think you left out of, you might detect a little southern accent from me. You left out, you mentioned where these two gentlemen were born, where the senators were born. I was born in southern Maryland, which is a lot in common culturally with, say, North Carolina. So if that comes out, you'll just have to forgive me. But I bring a little bit of that with me. I want to start by saying that Commissioner Charlie Zelle would certainly sends his regards and his regrets that he couldn't be here personally and sitting on the table. It's a privilege for me to substitute for him from time to time. He's a very charismatic and competent speaker, and he always comes with this very humble bus guy, but he really understands and has a vision for transportation in Minnesota that is shared throughout the department. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about that vision and talk a little bit about the principles of funding that we talked about inside the hallways of MnDOT and with Senator Dibble and Senator Pederson and folks in the House and in the Governor's office. And so I'll start by talking about this idea of a transportation system that works. And we have focused a lot about that kind of system in MnDOT. We recognize that an aspiration to build a world-class transportation system with all the demands on public resources is maybe too ambitious and beyond what is needed in the state of Minnesota to function well. What we need is a transportation system that works. And that system would feature new and reconstructed roads, interchanges, bridges, and transit options. I think I'll put it very well when he talked about the principles in your opening remarks. And one of those principles is that the system for the 21st century needs to be a multimodal system. Whether we had disagreements about what that looks like or what the mix looks like, we need an integrated system. We cannot build our way out of congestion in the urban core or in greater Minnesota. Even more important is the kind of investment that lets us do a better job of maintaining the system that we already have. I'm fond of reminding people that Minnesota has the 5th largest transportation system when you count all the systems, local systems as well as the state. 5th largest in the country. We are by no means the 5th largest state in the country. We're about 14th. And our population center that pays the taxes that support that system is about 21st, 22nd. So we have a very large system that we need to take care of out there, and that is among our very first stewardships. So our aim is to build a system that keeps Minnesota economically competitive and our quality of life high. We know that transportation is an important ingredient to keeping talent in Minnesota and attract new workers and employers to a growing economy. So about 38% of, we also know that it's not just the metropolitan area that I'm talking about, but we need to, there's a lot of growing regions. We heard the Destination Medical Center in Rochester and 35,000 new jobs anticipated there. I saw my friend Cal Brink. He might still be over there, but I can't see him anymore, even though he's a big guy. There he is. But down in the Mankato, New Ulm area is a lot of economic growth, Duluth, and throughout Minnesota, St. Cloud, not to mention. Growing regional centers of commerce throughout the state, and we need to have a transportation system that is, supports that kind of growth. We also know that by raising more funds for the Highway User Transportation Fund, we get 38% of those will go to state and local systems and support the growth there that's needed to support that growth. Today, we have the 7th worst rural road system in the country. I don't think that comes as a surprise to this audience, but it nevertheless merits being said. One of our bottlenecks in the Twin Cities, this would be 35W near 494, 694. I get those confused, even though I've been here, 12 years. I still mess it up from time to time. But it is number 17 worst bottleneck or congested area in the country. It's 250 worst traffic tie-ups. We have a fascination with lists, I think, in this country, but being 17th on a list like that is not shouldn't be an aspiration of ours. And nearly 2,000 miles of our state's transportation system, state roads, are at or beyond their useful life. We have used them beyond their useful life. And so what might be working today won't be working tomorrow, and we have a responsibility to deal with that. Senator Dibble alluded to an anticipated growth of about 1 million people, many of whom will live here in Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Tourism is growing, truck and rail traffic is on the rise, and the budget doesn't allow for the additional expansion projects out in greater Minnesota. I think in the second 10 years of our Minnesota State Highway Investment Plan, we have a grand total of $0 planned for our interregional corridors in those investments. So we do have a funding problem. Couple of closing remarks, and I'll pass it on to our next speaker. Much has been said about the agency's commitment to find efficiencies. We recognize, and Commissioner Zelli is a corporate executive officer and businessman, emphasizes inside the department the need to be efficient, and that we're going to have to bring solutions ourselves through our own innovations and through our own work that help close the gap between the transportation vision we have for Minnesota and the resources we have. That being said, it's be horribly inefficient when we're undercapitalized. We simply end up putting patches on roads and that need major reconstruction that we can't afford. And that is not efficient. That's not good for Minnesota. We cannot economize our way out of this gap, and so we will be looking to the legislature and our elected representatives across the state to help us with a solution that closes that gap. Specific funded proposals are under discussion. We are talking with things with the governor. Some of the mechanisms that Senator Dibble has alluded to, both senators have alluded to, are on the table, and we're discussing them. We look at it and think about it in these principles. That needs to be broad-based, that the user fee, the idea that the people who benefit and use the system are paying for the system or helping pay for the system is an important aspect of it, that it'll work for multiple modes of transportation, and it's related to our use. So those are the principles that will guide those discussions going forward, and I look forward to what I'm sure will be a high-energy 2015 session. So,
thank you, Erik. Our final panelist is Fritz Knaak, who was co-author of the Transportation, Moving People and Commerce Where They Want Need to Go from the Center for the American Experiment. Fritz has a distinguished legal career. He was a former state senator here in Minnesota, an attorney for Holstead and Knaak. He is one of the country's leading experts in election law, and I know there's been a number of situations where he has been involved in recounts here in Minnesota. It's fun to talk with him about that. Would you please welcome Fritz Knaak, who's going to present some of the findings and recommendations from that report from the Center for the American Experience.
Thank you very much, and I very much appreciate being here, and even with the difficult reminder of my legal past as the lawyer for Norm Coleman. Usually when I go to a group of Republicans that are of this size, more or less, people will come up to me and introduce themselves because they want to meet the guy who lost Norm's election. Thanks for that, Commissioner. No worries. One of the things that happens to you as a former senator is all of a sudden people start thinking that you're a statesman. Now, I'm not. I see one of my former colleagues, Senator Novak, who is a statesman, I'll say, out there. But you never lose your interest for the policy. You never lose your interest and fascination for the ideas that motivate so much of what goes on in politics generally in our state. So I was delighted when I got asked by the Center for the American Experiment to participate in this policy analysis and ultimately a policy paper. And I've got to pitch its location if you want to read it, a legislative area or an office of a legislator, and you would hear a peculiar noise, not heard anymore, known as a typewriter. And there would be other kinds of things that would be going on back then. And back then, as now, we polled. And in our case, we polled every other year, and more often than that in election years, of course. And one of the questions that always got asked is what was known in the trade as the pothole question, which is a local question. You have some matter of interest to you, some matter of your own local interest that matters to you. That was called the pothole question, and it was called that because as often as not, the answer was, well, I don't like the way our roads are being handled by our city or anything like that. Well, things have evolved or devolved, depending on how you want to look at it, to a point where in a poll that we cite in our paper, 51% of Minnesotans, when asked the question, what is the most important function of government, 51% said roads and bridges. Roads and bridges. Now, Erik had mentioned a couple of statistics that were important. We're, I think, 43rd in rural roads, in rural road conditions. If you actually go urban interstate, it's 41st. Hooray. People in this state are used to being exceptional, used to thinking of themselves as exceptional. And you haven't heard a lot of complaining about it because, after all, we're Minnesotans. And yeah, I just went through a big pothole, but so did the guy behind me. We're all in this together, right? That's changing. You've seen, I think, a fairly radical shift in attitude about roads. And so I think the good news would be that there is a consensus to get something done. So in the fray of this, what the Center for the American Experiment did their study and come up with some ideas. Now, to be sure, those of you that don't know, the Center for American Experiment is not partisan, but it is conservative. So you won't hear anything arguably quote-unquote progressive in these ideas, but I think they're interesting, and this is the time we need to be talking about some of these solutions. And I'm going to give you the summary of that and invite you to read the study for more. First off, we're suggesting that there be a moratorium, a cooling off period, a pause in the funding for light rail projects, and argue that transit dollars should be spent on less costly options. And those of you that know how these numbers play know that things like light buses, even dedicated buses and high-speed buses, are considerably more cost-effective where that kind of transportation is necessary. Before then, here's the kicker. This is really all about money. Before we go into identifying new funding sources, our position is you need to dedicate and allocate from existing resources first. We're not saying that there should be no consideration of new taxes or anything like that, or fees, but first you take a look at dedicating, as other states do, other funding sources. And we suggest, as a starter, taking 0.25 cents out of the existing sales tax and dedicating that to roads. The will is there. The public desire to have roads be a principal function of the government is there. And as we're looking at an environment where things like revenues from gas taxes and those kinds of things are diminishing, it's time we get on to looking at other sources. And one of those other sources, guess what, is our current fund sources from the sales tax and current fund sources from general revenue. So we're saying, look at that, do that, create that priority. And I'm not suggesting for a second that I think that's going to be easy. We have just a brief recommendation that we direct the legislative auditor to actually look at some of these projections and numbers and make sure we're on course. We have good confidence in what the Department of Transportation has been providing us, but we think that's an additional resource that should be used. We're talking practically that the current county transit improvement boards that you're all aware of, or should be, actually be transitioned into something, they already exist, but transitioned into something we call a county transportation improvement board. Transportation improvement board as opposed to transit. In other words, to allow a greater kind of look at projects and to allow these more local-oriented institutions or organizations to actually focus on local problems, local congestion problems primarily. We suggest that Minnesota law be modified to allow for greater implementation of public-private partnership solutions to bottlenecks. And finally, we would direct or ask that the legislature direct the Department of Transportation to do something which seems pretty logical, but hasn't occurred, which is to direct them to actually prioritize the elimination of congestion. Prioritize the elimination of congestion as one of their principal objectives. And we suggest a goal of 20% reduction within 10 years of congestion on the road system. That's ambitious, but we're Minnesotans and we can do it, all right? Unfortunately, as we're looking at the current situation, we're seeing a situation, and I don't fault the Department of Transportation for being forced into this situation by lack of funding, but where congestion has ceased to be a priority. It's the #1 problem. And if you're looking at it from the point of view of keeping Minnesota competitive, not just nationally, but internationally, dealing with the congestion issue is fundamental. And it's certainly the one that Minnesotans generally are keenly aware of and needs to be addressed. And if you look at the long-term plan of the Department of Transportation, congestion actually ceases to be a part of their focused priorities for how they're going to be handling transportation problems. That's an issue that we think needs to be taken care of. So these are just some of the ideas and conclusions that we've reached. They're ideas. It's a fascinating series of issues, but it's vitally important for the future economic vitality of the state. I would like to thank you, I should have done at the beginning, for inviting me, and I welcome any questions or comments and responses from my colleagues and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, you have heard the presentation, you've heard the options, a description of the issues. Now it's your turn to ask questions of our panelists.